Friedrich Jeckeln was one of Nazi Germany's most notorious SS commanders, responsible for orchestrating some of the most brutal massacres of Jews during the Holocaust. Born in 1895 in Germany, Jeckeln was a career soldier who rose through the ranks of the SS to become one of its most trusted leaders. He held significant power in Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe, where he implemented the final solution with ruthless efficiency. As a leader of the SS forces in the Baltic states and Ukraine, Jeckeln directly oversaw mass executions and deportations, becoming known for his particularly gruesome methods of mass murder. Jeckeln's most infamous act came in late 1941, during the Rumbula massacre in Latvia. This massacre, part of the larger Holocaust, saw the cold-blooded execution of more than 25,000 Jews, shot and buried in mass graves. This mass killing earned Jeckeln a reputation for being one of the most cold-hearted and efficient killers in the Nazi hierarchy. Friedrich Jeckeln's story is one of a man who used his military authority not for any noble cause, but for the systematic extermination of innocent people. His blind loyalty to Adolf Hitler and his fanatical belief in Nazi ideology led him to commit unspeakable crimes, and for this, history will forever remember him as one of the architects of the Holocaust. Jeckeln's primary goal was to carry out Adolf Hitler's vision of the final solution, the complete annihilation of Europe's Jewish population. Under his command, he sought to eliminate the Jews of Latvia and other occupied territories in the most efficient way possible. He was not merely a soldier following orders. Jeckeln took personal pride in organizing and executing mass killings, developing his own methods to expedite the process of extermination. His ultimate desire was to prove his loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi regime by showing that he could implement their genocidal policies with chilling precision. The Rumbula massacre stands as a testament to Jeckeln's drive to carry out the Nazis' genocidal agenda. In 2 brutal days, November 30th and December 8th, 1941, over 25,000 Jews from the Riga ghetto were marched to the Rumbula forest, stripped of their belongings and clothing, forced to lie down in prepared pits, and then shot. Jeckeln's cold efficiency in organizing this slaughter was unparalleled. He ordered his men to shoot Jews in groups, maximizing the number of bodies that could be packed into the mass graves. Women, children, and the elderly were not spared, and the methodical manner in which the killings were carried out shocked even some of Jeckeln's Nazi colleagues. Jeckeln's murderous campaign in Latvia and the occupied Soviet territories came to an abrupt halt as Nazi Germany's fortunes in World War II began to crumble. With the defeat of the German army at Stalingrad and the subsequent push by Soviet forces into Eastern Europe, Jeckeln found himself on the defensive. As the Red Army advanced, liberating territories that had been under Nazi control, the evidence of the atrocities committed by the SS began to emerge. Mass graves were uncovered, and eyewitness accounts of the massacres began to reach the Allies. Jeckeln's reign of terror could not continue as Nazi power diminished, and he was forced to retreat along with the collapsing German war machine. However, despite the collapse of the Nazi regime, Jeckeln, like many high-ranking Nazi officials, tried to escape justice. He went into hiding as Soviet forces closed in on Germany, hoping to evade capture and live out his days in obscurity. But the scale of his crimes was too great to be ignored. The Nuremberg trials, which had already begun prosecuting top Nazi officials, were determined to bring all those responsible for the Holocaust to justice. Jeckeln's role in the Rumbula massacre and other mass shootings placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the Soviet military and international justice. Jeckeln, like many Nazi officials, went into hiding in the final days of the war. He attempted to disguise himself and flee westward, away from the advancing Soviet forces, who were seeking to capture and prosecute Nazi war criminals. He hoped that by escaping to areas controlled by the Western Allies, he could either evade capture entirely or blend in with the massive flow of German refugees. However, Jeckeln's crimes were too monstrous and too well documented for him to simply vanish. The Soviets were particularly determined to capture high-ranking Nazi officials responsible for atrocities in their territories. As the commander who orchestrated the murder of tens of thousands of Jews in Latvia, Jeckeln was a prime target for Soviet justice. In early 1946, he was apprehended by Soviet forces, and his days of evading accountability came to an end. Jeckeln's arrest marked the beginning of his downfall. He was taken into Soviet custody and immediately charged with crimes against humanity for his role in the Holocaust. The Soviets were particularly interested in bringing Jeckeln to justice because of the crimes he committed on their soil. His capture was a significant victory for those seeking to hold Nazi war criminals accountable for their actions. Despite his attempts to flee, Jeckeln's escape plan ultimately failed because of the overwhelming evidence against him and the determination of the Allied forces to bring war criminals to justice. The Rumbula massacre was one of the most infamous massacres of the Holocaust, and its perpetrators were relentlessly pursued. Jeckeln's high rank in the SS and his direct involvement in mass murder made him a key target for Soviet prosecutors. Jeckeln's capture and trial would be swift. Unlike many of his peers who were tried at the Nuremberg trials, Jeckeln was tried in a Soviet military tribunal. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with detailed records of his crimes and eyewitness testimony from survivors. The Soviets were not interested in lengthy legal proceedings. They wanted swift justice for the atrocities committed on their soil. Jeckeln's trial was held in Riga, the very city where he had orchestrated the mass murder of tens of thousands of Jews. The trial was quick, with the Soviet military tribunal delivering a guilty verdict based on the mountains of evidence presented against him. Jeckeln was sentenced to death for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. His sentence would be carried out in the most public and humiliating manner possible. On February 3, 1946, just a few weeks after his conviction, Jeckeln was publicly hanged in Riga, Latvia, in front of a large crowd of spectators. His execution was designed not only as a punishment, but as a stark reminder of the horrors he had inflicted upon the people of Latvia. The site of his hanging was symbolic. It was close to the very forest where the Rumbula massacre had taken place. The execution was intentionally brutal and public, intended to send a clear message that those responsible for the Holocaust would face the consequences of their actions. Jeckeln, once a powerful SS commander, was now nothing more than a disgraced war criminal, facing the ultimate punishment for his crimes. As the noose tightened around his neck and the platform dropped beneath him, the man who had orchestrated the cold-blooded murder of 25,000 Jews met his painful end. Jeckeln's hanging was not just a moment of justice for the Jewish community, but also for the Soviet people who had suffered under Nazi occupation. The crowd watched as Jeckeln's lifeless body hung from the gallows, a stark contrast to the fearsome figure he had once been. His death, though painful and humiliating, could never truly atone for the lives he had taken, but it offered a sense of closure for those who had survived the horrors of the Rumbula massacre. Jeckeln's execution was broadcast worldwide, serving as a grim reminder of the atrocities committed during the Holocaust and the importance of holding war criminals accountable. His end was fitting for a man who had shown no mercy to his victims, and his legacy remains one of infamy and horror. Friedrich Jeckeln will forever be remembered as one of the architects of the Holocaust, responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent people. His role in the Rumbula massacre stands as one of the most horrific examples of the Nazis' genocidal policies. While his execution could never undo the suffering he caused, it served as a powerful moment of justice for his victims and the world at large. The Rumbula massacre remains a symbol of the unimaginable cruelty that took place during the Holocaust, and Jeckeln's public execution marked the end of one of the most notorious war criminals of the era. Though he tried to escape justice, his crimes were too vast to be forgotten, and his painful death was a fitting conclusion to a life steeped in brutality. Jeckeln's name will forever be associated with the darkest chapter in human history, and his execution stands as a reminder that justice, though delayed, will eventually be served.